Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another deep dive with OA. My name is Omar Abedin, and I am really excited about our guest today, Cory Janssen. Cory is co-founder and co-CEO of AltaML, one of North America's largest venture studios focused on artificial intelligence and machine learning. And as all of you know, I am really keen on learning as much as I can about venture studios since I run a tiny little one myself. And previously, Cory was co-founder of Investopedia, a financial education site that provided content and tools to help educate individual investors from its founding in 1999. So, Cory is one of the originals of the internet.
Original is nicer than old, right?
Original, classic, absolute. I mean, Investopedia became one of the most popular financial sites in the world, and it was sold to Forbes Media, I think, in 2007 for an undisclosed amount. But then Forbes sold it onwards a few years later, and we know how much they sold that for, so we can kind of do the math. The business model for Investopedia was then replicated through Janalta Interactive, which is a holding company for digital media properties. Cory, welcome to the show.
Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. So we have to start with Investopedia because, as I was saying to you a minute ago, when the internet came to South Asia, one of the few names that we heard globally in the field of finance and the field of advisory was Investopedia. So can you share, how you built that company, how you exited, and how did you then transition into AI?
Yeah, sure. There's a bunch there, but
yeah, I know.
Essentially, I was still in university where I live in Canada at the University of Alberta, and you got to remember at the .com bubble, in some ways I think was even more hype cycle than some of what we're seeing in the latest round of tech and more recently AI. And so we would go and sit and study afterwards at night. And a friend of mine who, in a stereotypical Canadian way, I knew him from hockey, right? Played hockey with him, and then was one of my close friends. And we would go up and just talk about what .com we could start. So back in the days, you saw all these companies when they raised their round, they would actually be buying magazine ads, which sounds crazy today, right? But there was a magazine called Business 2.0 and Red Herring. They were like, you could tell how good the VC markets were by how thick these magazines were, right? And so we'd be flipping through and just coming up with ideas. We were both stock geeks, so we knew we wanted to start something there. But to be honest, we started 4 or 5 different sites. We didn't actually think that Investopedia was going to be necessarily the big one. And so it's kind of funny afterwards. We essentially brainstormed out the biggest, baddest investment website you could imagine, a little bit of like Yahoo Finance. Back then, the street.com was massive. The Motley Fool was just coming off. So we kind of said, here are all the things we'd want. And it looked great. And it wasn't on a bar napkin. I mean, we were studying, but we sketched this out. And in the next morning, in a more sober light, we're like, well, we probably don't have the resources to do this and this and this, but why don't we start off with the investing dictionary? Because we could write that content once, and being timeless in nature, that would be good for a while. And then we could get to all the other fun stuff. We stumbled upon a niche where building educational content and tools was something that no one else was doing, almost kind of too boring, right? And so, but the economics worked really, really well because you could monetize that content like an annuity over a longer period of time. And so what that evolved into was, because we had kind of stumbled upon that niche, a great business over the ensuing few years.
Amazing.
Yeah. So anyway, we could dive into it if you want in terms of it, but the way we got into AI was actually another accident, which I guess is, for those looking starting a company out there, I always laugh when I've never had a good idea of what the company would be necessarily right off the get-go. I've never just sat there and being able to brainstorm that out, which ties to the venture studio side of it. It's always been you get in the game somehow, you see some opportunity, and then other doors open. So I basically tried to replicate Investopedia in other industries. Think really boring industrial, like industries that weren't quite yet disrupted by the internet. So think like industrial safety would be one example. So we threw in a bunch of cash to build a platform, essentially a CMS. But you got to remember, in the late 2000s, WordPress and Webflow weren't where they are today, right? And so basically built my own custom CMS for these pedia sites, and those went okay, and we've a few of those sites have taken off. But I was spending so much money on Upwork around outside content production, with having freelancers from around the world. Around 2015, had approached some profs at the University of Alberta saying that I wanted to do algorithmic content production. Now, this is 2015. So generative AI wasn't a term back then. The paper for around and not to get into too much of a technical tangent here, but a big portion of the technology that powers large language models like ChatGPT, it's called a transformer. And the paper for that came out in 2017, 2018. OpenAI was working on that, through then, obviously to present. So in 2015, like, Omar, I'll ask you, you could say maybe I was a visionary, or the alternative, and that's more reality, is maybe I was off by a few years and off by a few $100 million in terms of what that project would take. Being early is the same as being wrong, right? And so the project was a huge failure, but stumbled upon, and I'm ashamed to say it right now, right here in my backyard, we have a top 10 school worldwide for the academic side of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So Edmonton is really famous for a prof by the name of Dr. Richard Sutton. So he wrote the first book on reinforcement learning. And so what happened is you built this cluster of 40 or 50 profs doing research in AI in, frankly, the middle of the Arctic tundra. We're not quite the Arctic, but it's almost. It gets cold here, right?
For the rest of the world, it is, yeah.
So we're attracting some of the best and brightest from around the world that want to study under these profs. But in an ecosystem from a tech perspective that was, let's call it nascent or emerging. So 7 years ago, we were losing 90% of these masters or PhDs. They would come study here and then have to go to the Valley. Really complicated business model at first. We said, okay, instead of hiring 2 or 3, let's hire 4 or 5. And before you knew it, we had 20 machine learning engineers, and we tried to figure out a business. Anyway, let me stop there. That's a long intro, but like, it actually is a complete tie-in from Investopedia and creating content, and actually funny how, I feel like again, like, knew that there was this potential in Gen AI, but never necessarily knew how it would happen, and so it's been interesting how it's unfolded.
No, that's amazing, because my next question was going to be, how did you decide to get into AltaML and what inspired you? But it seems like, okay, so now the story is getting it's taken this weird plot twist where now you have 20 machine learning engineers. What happens next? What do you do?
Well, I had no idea what we were doing in the early days. I think the machine learning as an industry is definitely obviously maturing. I still think it feels a lot like the .com bubble. Like I kind of feel, we have to be close to peak hype, I think. So one might, and timing is always hard, but I would argue that maybe we're at, the equivalent in the .com bubble of 99 or 2000. Like, there will be a crash, there will be a washout. But people seem to forget, unless you study economic history, like, the great companies are on the internet, many of them were created after the pop of the .com bubble.
Yeah.
And so I think that same opportunity exists now. The companies, especially on vertical AI where we focus, I believe those will be created over the next 5 to 10 years. In some ways, I think of ChatGPT as almost the Netscape moment for AI, where Netscape didn't invent the internet, but it was a brilliant product that for the first time made people realize what was possible with this new communications network called the internet. Like, you could use the internet beforehand. I mean, and lots of geeks would be on there, using elements that were harder to use, including myself, right? And that's the same now. For the first time, I think the average executive and the average person, frankly, says they equate ChatGPT with AI. And clearly anybody in the field knows that that's not true. But I think you need to take your hat off to OpenAI in terms of the brilliance from a product perspective. Like, for the most part, it's not like they invented any of the underlying tech. When you look at the deep learning in the back end, which was, really invented the U of T and University of Toronto and Montreal, and Jan LeCun's at NYU, but that three kind of profs that were really the main ones spearheading it. And then, some of the RL in the front end, right, which has roots in Carnegie Mellon, and again, tie into the U of A, and of course, it's across North America. But the point is that OpenAI, this is, I respect it for the brilliance in the product and the promotion side of this, and how for the first time it's captured that imagination of those out there, even though it's not necessarily, it's an interesting debate whether it is a deep tech play or not. I'm sure the engineers internally said, do you know the problems we had to solve to make this work? And there's probably dozens or hundreds of examples. So it's not meaning disrespect from that perspective. But in many ways, will this be something that just catalyzes, like with Netscape and the internet? I mean, will ChatGPT become sort of the brand name, the Kleenex of this, or will it go the same way of Netscape as all the players come in and compete? It'll be interesting to see how that unfolds.
Would you care to make a prediction?
No, I don't. I mean, you know what? Like, what I focus on, and every single time I talk with people, hey, what's your prediction on the Singularity and AGI and all this? I'm like, I'm just a dumb entrepreneur, right? I just see an opportunity in the space where I think data and AI will transform every industry. And so I believe there's an opportunity to create vertical AI applications that, will literally transform the most traditional industries in the world, but also have the opportunity to really, elevate human potential. So much of what we see is the building tools that help professionals be superhuman. And I think that's the story that maybe gets lost because of the doomers. It's a lot easier to write articles about how AI is going to destroy humanity. I think it's going to save it.
Well, I certainly hope you're right about that. But come back to vertical AI. Please help me understand, what do you mean by vertical AI? And is that where you're going to be concentrating your efforts moving forward?
Sure. So think of when we first started out, and I guess maybe I should back up a little bit here in terms of how we, the thesis and originally, and obviously, hire a bunch of people and figure, like, unless you have any data, you can't actually do a whole lot in machine learning, obviously, right? Now, most of the data exists in the incumbents. And so I think what you've seen happen is, like, a lot of venture funds have gone into companies that said, okay, we've got a PhD, he hires a bunch of his buddies, you put this together and you go, I think I've seen this pattern dozens of times of, okay, they don't get a beachhead market, or they say, we're going to do overall AI. Well, there's no broad AI for the most part, right? I mean, let's put like the general, the LLMs aside for a second. Like, imagine if we're 5 years ago, almost everything that's making difference is narrow in scope. So you need to get access to data, but most of the data exists in large organizations. The incumbents, for the most part, still have most of that data edge, right? And so you've seen a bunch of these companies come in and then say, oh crap, we can't get product market fit doing this one thing. So maybe we'll just build a platform. We'll just be a platform that other ML engineers can use, because we know a ton about tracking experiments or model management or any of the aspects of that. But this little company called Databricks, and more and more this little company called Snowflake, and then the hyperscalers, so Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, all started putting billions of dollars into this space. So I think of some of the projects I greenlit 4 or 5 years ago that are just a feature right now in SageMaker, right? Or a feat. And so when we say vertical versus horizontal, I think of horizontal as that entire layer, that infrastructure where AI has moved from that laptop and someone, you know, having a few GPUs in their own laptop and kind of building stuff pure open source from their post-secondary to being actually built in the cloud and being built with these tools where now you've got literally billions of dollars worth of investment put in because the hyperscalers want to be utilities, and AI workloads are some of the best that exist. So if you can create that sandbox in which to build applications, then there's a huge advantage to most engineers. And there was I think, huge pushback on this, like maybe 4 or 5 years. I mean, I remember at the start of the pandemic, fighting with our team saying that we can't possibly be doing this in the cloud. Now it almost seems like, why would you do anything other than that? So I believe, and my, you know, it's my thesis, and that it's very, very difficult to compete building tools or building anything on this horizontal layer, this infrastructure. And so I'll include the hyperscalers, Databricks, Snowflake. There's a whole bunch more other companies that you could tie into that. I would include LLMs in that box. I think it's going to be infrastructure. Now, clearly, there's some amazing companies. Cohere is one great Canadian company in this space, Anthropic, and all the others that have raised tons of money in addition to OpenAI. So there will be winners in that space, clearly. But you need hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to play there. And I still think that this is part of the generalized horizontal layer. So think of instead building on top of Azure or building on top of AWS and focusing on, can I understand the workflows for this industry better than anybody? And can I build a unique edge on data? Can I get some data to start off with, but create that flywheel so that you've got a unique data edge? By definition, that has to be for that specific industry.
I get it.
And that way you're not competing as well. Like, I mean, so this also means we're more enterprise focused than consumer. Like I don't, and again, this isn't to throw shade on other people's investment thesis. I mean, it's a market out there, and people will make money in a whole bunch of different ways. And hey, maybe we should have tried to launch our own LLM and raise $1 billion, right? I don't know, right? It's just, you know,
28.
almost this boring cockroach type approach, right? Like, imagine if you know, eventually built. And that ties back into the venture studio, right? Where you can get, you know, sometimes VC backable, sometimes not. But if you can solve mission critical tasks within the enterprise, I think you can create a pretty big business.
But I mean, it's such a fluid, market category, space that, I mean, how do you ensure that a company like AltaML actually stays at the forefront of this? Because you guys are going to be solving multiple problems in the venture studio, right? So it's not that you're solving one problem, you're solving multiple, I guess, multiple issues from multiple verticals. So how do you continue to innovate and stay kind of at the edge of that, at that curve?
So I mean, there's a bunch of different ways to take on that question. And I mean, can we assume that your audience understands venture studios, or do we need to kind of even get into a little bit of a, I'm curious in your definition of a venture studio, by the way.
I would love to hear yours, because I've spoken to 10 venture studio founders and all of them have a slightly different model. So I'd love to learn about yours.
The way I describe a venture, you know, describe as, say, we are an early stage investor in applied AI. But our difference is we're an institutional co-founder. So unlike a seed stage VC, we actually get our hands dirty and will be involved, you know, often right from initial company formation, you know, and being first money in. So we'll usually be on the cap table as a founding shareholder, lead that pre-seed, be the pre-seed round, and lead the seed round. So it's money, but it's also that operational expertise, which ties into the AI side, because we've seen through our sort of sister organization, our broader company where we build large AI labs with corporates, we've seen nearly 500 AI use cases over the past few years. So because we've got that institutional knowledge, some kind of common building blocks for IP, and the talent, we can offer entrepreneurs an edge to build with us when AI is at the core of their product.
Okay.
Anyway, then they'll usually say, well, I don't get it. So you're an incubator? I go, no. So, you know, we provide, you know, technically speaking, you know, you'd say a Y Combinator Techstars for a cohort-based, you know, incubator accelerator model, usually cohort-based, very strict program, you know, and often we need to follow up in terms of, like, you know, almost like, here's the difference of, and Moro, formerly GSN, has some great sort of pictorials of this and ways to explain it, but you say, it's similar but different in that we're actually providing a lot more, or the things that we would provide would be much more integrated and we'd be a lot closer. Really think of it as that institutional co-founder. It's changing the way that businesses are built. Well, it's not new, and most have heard of Idea Lab. To be honest, a lot of people haven't heard of flagship pioneering, and everyone knows Moderna, but they didn't realize that it came out of a studio. Everyone knows Snowflake, but they didn't realize that it came out of a studio. So as you're seeing some of these wins, and as you're seeing some of the most popular studios raise pretty significant rounds, Pioneer Square Labs in Seattle raised 100 million off their last fund. Atomic out of Miami raised 300 million. I think that you'll see venture studios as an asset class unto themselves, whereas right now, even those in venture sometimes go like, well, what's going on here? But our whole thesis of being able to add deep expertise on the AI side, I think really plays well. And so, when there's certainly a technical aspect to that in terms of the team we have, like I said, in terms of the experience, what we've built. But I think having worked on, so many projects in the space, and especially focus on the enterprise, one of the problems with getting adoption with ML application is most often actually not technical in our experience. When you're going in and trying to sell in the enterprise, first of all, the enterprise sales cycle is really difficult. But adoption and education are amongst the biggest issues. If you don't have support in multiple layers of the organization, you're actually not going to get that application used. And so seeing applications many times and having, again, because our business is set up with some sort of investor, company builder on one side, and then studio with large organizations on the other side. Because we have this sandbox that we can play in, we're putting solutions into place, and that expertise actually gives us a leg up when we think from a company perspective.
I'm sure it does, but what does that mean for the founder that you're partnering with? Are you able to talk about, how typically what kind of equity you guys take? What kind of investment do you make in, at the pre-seed or seed level? Is that something you can discuss?
Yeah, no, happy to talk about that. And it depends on the situation. Sometimes, there's three ways we create companies. Sometimes we'll create it from the ground up ourselves and then recruit that co-founder. Sometimes entrepreneurs will come to us and want to build with, again, us. And then what is unique with us is because we've got these corporate labs, that is the third path that is maybe unique to us versus other studios, that we have companies that come out of that, sometimes with that corporate partner involved in some way. And so, we won't really put on our shorts in the morning unless we have sort of 10% equity in terms of that founding cap table. And the sweet spot, I think, is to make the cap tables work probably around sort of that 25% level, which of course is diluted down over time. So we'll come in initially as that founding shareholder, putting in significant resources for that equity. Like I kind of hate the term take equity, because it's like, I think we earn it in terms of the value that we can bring. But then what's happening in the studio world is you see this dual entity model. So the studio itself is just a regular corporation. So it's going in and putting in that initial investment and putting in as that institutional co-founder to be on with founder shares, and then having our fund on the other side to be able to come in. It would lead the pre-seed round, which we do as a safe. Could be anywhere between 250 to 750. Think of it, usually the sweet spot is like you'll be very quick on a 250K check, and then if you're hitting the right milestones, you could go up to another 500. And then for the seed round, if you think of a standard sort of $2 million seed round, we want to co-lead that with someone else. So I need to have another investor involved in that point. That's how we make sure that we are intellectually honest about the investment decision as well as terms to be fair to all. And we also want to have that deep industry expertise involved from that perspective as well. So, we might be, say, $1 million to $1.5 million in on that seed round. The way I think of it as well is that what we bring for founders is number one, that expertise in AI. So if you need that technical co-founder that has that, I think we're amongst the best in the world. But really what my pitch is selling time. I've raised money. I've started multiple businesses. I'm an entrepreneur. I mean, it's something as bad as I'm talking like, I'm an entrepreneur, not a VC. I mean, many VCs are entrepreneurs and they transition in, right? And so in where I'm at is that we're at the point now as with our next fund, where yes, I've got a venture fund, but it's always, you know, a lot of funds talk about being entrepreneur first, but like I'm a builder. We're involved in that. And so we want to be on the founders team because we're founders ourselves. So we're coming from that aspect. I know how long it takes to raise capital. At the early stage, what matters is go to market. What matters is product and talking to customers. If we can enable founding teams to be able to be laser focused on that and not have to do all the other BS of raising money by cutting checks quick, right? Like we don't have the deepest pockets, but we can move fast. So if we can move fast and been on that team, I think that over time will be as big an edge as the expertise we bring in AI and data science.
I would agree with you. As someone who has sort of legs in both sides of that particular conundrum, I think the speed that studios bring is quite amazing. Okay, so thank you for that intro. Now let's take a step back because I really want to pick your brain about ChatGPT and generative AI in general. So can you help my non-tech audience, or members that may be not technologically savvy, understand what generative AI is and how it differs from other types of AI?
And so generative AI is an interesting bucket because it from a technical perspective isn't necessarily its own type of AI. I mean, it uses some of the same underlying technologies, or can use really any of the underlying technologies that you see in narrow AI. I think what's different is Gen AI is referring to any type of AI that's creating new content. Now, you can get into the nuances here if you want to really geek out, if you're technical about everything's making predictions and really ChatGPT is making predictions. Let's avoid that piece for now and just say it's a type of AI that creates content. That can be text, that could be, you know, images or video, right? That could be computer code. So I like to explain it best through giving examples with Midjourney and saying, hey, and in an AI 101 or Gen AI 101, I literally say, okay, here's an example of, you know, a puppy dog wearing a, you know, New York Yankees jersey, right? Which it can create that, right? And so, okay, well, and so people haven't seen that, they get that. And then most people have seen ChatGPT. So okay, so that's Gen AI, right? But what really drives the example home from a business audience is showing them an example of copilots. And so understanding, oh, wait a minute, this all isn't just fun and games and being able to actually help me draft email. Oh, that's the business usage of it, right? Because, you know, if you can say text or computer code, that's a, you know, different use case. And so when you understand that this is all about just the creation of content, as opposed to necessarily just making a decision support tool, it is its own unique category. However, don't forget about the rest of AI. There's tons of other applications that are out there. So it's neither that one is better or worse. It's just that this has enabled us to do different things.
So why now? Why is AI booming now? Where you've talked about a hype cycle for the internet. You've talked about, you know, different hype cycles that we've seen over the last, let's say, 20 years. Why is this happening now? I mean, why $28 billion for OpenAI, as an example?
I mean, it's really a hardware story. A lot of this stuff isn't new. Like if you go back and read Geoffrey Hinton's papers on deep learning going back, you know, 20 or 30 years ago, or whatever technically it was, right? And so I think as you had the ImageNet moment back in, was that 2016 now? So basically, the first time deep learning really broke through was in this kind of common competition that within computing science. And so as the hardware is caught up in terms of compute, cost of storage, taking these older ideas and of course building on them and creating new ones, I think you're finally seeing the time where unlike in previous sort of AI hype cycles, like you're actually able to accomplish real business outcomes. And so when you look at the history of it and understand that it's the software married up with what's actually there on the hardware side, it makes sense why it's happening now.
Okay. So what is the future of Gen AI? Where are we headed?
I think you're going to see co-pilots or virtual assistants in virtually every profession. I mean, you'll see it in your personal life as well. But I think we're going to look back at this time almost like, well, I remember a time you had before you had your email everywhere. I mean, I remember in the early 2000s where before Research in Motion and BlackBerry came out, you would be traveling on a trip and you wouldn't have access to your email. Like you talk to a 19-year-old kid out there today, and that seems like that was 15 years ago, maybe a little bit, maybe between 15 and 20, but you know what I'm saying, right?
20 years ago, I was in Montreal when J&J bought the first 200 Blackberries for the J&J team.
Yeah, I can remember being in New York in the early 2000s, right, and seeing these investment bankers on this weird phone going, what is that, right? And so I think that we're going to look, I mean, so it sounds archaic to not have, and I'm just talking about email, right? If you think about co-pilots or broader virtual assistants, clearly those are going to be in the Office suite, and both Google and Microsoft will be fighting over that, right? And so everyone understands the examples of booking something in your calendar and so forth. Here's an example that was brought up to me that's about as boring and traditional as you can get. I had a great entrepreneur call me up and say, hey, my son's got this idea. He is an electrician and he's on site and he's getting his seal, right? Like he's kind of going through his apprenticeship, and the master electrician had to be on another job. So he can't do the work without talking back and forth with this master electrician. So he's on the phone. He's like, my son was talking to me. He's on the phone like 6 hours that day, trying to get details on, you're going back and forth from the code and the regulations locally, but also his experience. She's like, isn't this an application for large language models? And so come back 100%. When you think of LLMs that, that are fine-tuned and hit back a knowledge graph or some other source of truth that have deep industry expertise, I think that there's hundreds, thousands of applications of that you'll see everywhere. So you can imagine if this kid was able to actually go and interact back and forth, and maybe it's by text, maybe it's by voice in terms of that, to actually understand and work through that problem. So this is as low tech as it gets. It's a blue collar trade working on this. And we've seen examples in energy, in clean tech. We see examples in health. If you take the model that really, the term AI should be banned. Really, we're using data to optimize a business process. What Gen AI and LLMs have done is they've created a whole new way of thinking about development and programming overall. We've got like this new massive tool in the toolbox, which comes back to it being part of that horizontal layer. This now gives us a whole new opportunity of problems that we can solve, so long as we, again, I'm going to get repetitive here, understand that industry and its workflows and start building a unique data set that gives us an edge or a moat there.
Wow. Okay. So you're disrupting the way that I think about this completely. And
how are you thinking about? I'm curious in your thoughts on that. It's
well, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts and trying to study up on what thinkers like Mr. Hariri, Yuval Noah Hariri, and Scott Galloway, and a couple of these guys have been talking about the effects, the impacts of AI on society at large, right? So where are we heading? Because there's a spectrum of views out there, right? So from we will end up working for the AI. The Lord and
the
slave,
dystopian,
the dystopian Terminator type view on the one hand. To the other hand, where 30 years from now, work as we know it will cease to exist. And, we live in a post-work society where everyone, I mean, it sounds like nirvana, right? Where you do what you want to do and where you can add value and where your interests lie. And hopefully the planet is not underwater at that point, and we still have places that we can go to breathe clean air and all that. And these are the same people who are saying that AI will save the planet, right? This is part of that whole nirvana argument. So I'm honestly, I don't know where I fall on this spectrum at this point. I don't have enough knowledge to be able to come to a conclusion, which is why I love talking to people like you, because you've seen the growth of this technology. I think you probably understand the pitfalls at a gut level more than most people. So, I'd love to understand from you, like 30 years from now. I'll give you a very stupid and small example. My Spotify just recently launched my DJ, right? My personal DJ. And you wouldn't believe it. The first 5 songs this AI played are my top 5 songs of all time.
Right.
And said, hey, this is so-and-so, and I'm going to play. I'm like, yeah, sure. Okay, whatever. And my son and I were in the car together at the time, and the first 5 songs were 100% accurate. That scared the hell out of me. But since then, I have not bothered to go back to my liked songs or, try to find anything else. I just, hey, play something, man. And, gets it right most of the time.
Here's a meaningful example of that. Okay, you touched on so many different points here. So Khan Academy and Khan, I can't remember the guy's first name, something, you know what I'm talking about though. I mean, someone's watching this on YouTube, you could just, after you're done watching, you could just Google it. He talks about using LLMs within education. Imagine a situation where every child on the planet had their test scores, their homework, everything that was fed into their own coach, right? Their own personalized tutor that was there 24/7. And when you talk about opportunity around the planet, and I mean, I'm sitting here in North America, you're in Pakistan, like a kid in Pakistan should have the exact same opportunity as someone in New York or LA. But the fact of the matter is that, like, if you're in New York or LA, you can probably afford that great tutor and you can do this, and that's going to help you get to that university, right? Think about what gets unleashed where anybody, anywhere on the planet has this coach, this tutor, right? That is as good as any tutor of kid anywhere else. And it's tied to this curriculum that ties in on that Khan's built that's basically open sourced it. When you think about what that can enable, that gets really exciting because everyone talks to education. Oh, kids are cheating with LLMs. Well, look at the positive side. Look at how LLMs could actually create more opportunity than any other technology that's ever been invented for children. There's there's always, I think, the dystopian versus the opportunity. And if you're optimistic or pessimistic on this, you had 2 things. You talked on the AGI Terminator, and then you talked about the future of work and as there no work. And so I'm just an entrepreneur trying to build vertical AI applications that I think blah blah blah. For every doomer out there, there's another prof that is arguing the other side. So with all due respect to those that are being super negative, well, follow Jan LeCun's Twitter field or Twitter account, right? Follow Andrew Ng's, right? Because they've had intelligent conversations showing the other perspective. Many in that space, and this is I'm getting a bit over my skis here from a technical perspective, don't think that deep learning scales enough to get to AGI. There's a lot of people that believe that we're going to actually need a fundamentally different framework to get to AGI. And so will it have, some will say,
what is AGI?
Sorry, artificial general intelligence. When we talk about AI that's better than us, like AGI or super intelligent, right? So when we talk about the singularity, right? So many of these academics are talking about, like, I mean, when you really look at deep learning, it doesn't scale. I mean, we're like, how much more data is there to us to use on these models? Like, it's pretty inefficient. Like when you actually look at the architecture, it's actually crazy that this all works, right? It's just predicting the next word, the next character. So I guess the point is that for the doomers get the press, because that generates clicks. I mean, we used to say sell papers, right? But that gets clicks, right? And there are other opinions here that I think you can follow, right? From those that are just as esteemed as those that are putting this out. So that on the AGI conversation and the doomsday scenario, I think there's an interesting debate there. Are we losing the biggest risks in the short run? In the short run, the risk is around responsible AI and bias. If you have a data set with bias and you feed it into a machine learning model, you will exacerbate and accentuate that bias. And so the question is only, is there bias in society, right? And like, there's not a political question, it's a debate, but like, if you think that there's any bias whatsoever, then, as an executive or as a board member, you need to take that into account, and you should be using RAI, responsible AI, as a fundamental bedrock in terms of what you're building, right? Now, in all this talk about how we're going to, AI is going to end society, are we taking the focus off that we need regulation right now that both acknowledges this, but ensures that companies in North America, for example, I mean, I'm North American centric here, with all apologies to your audience in Asia. I want to make sure that if I'm building something here, that I'm not at a disadvantage to somewhere else on the planet. So we need to have regulation that reflects each nation state's values, but at the same time allows enough flexibility to actually have innovation, right? But I think we would all agree that it's bad if you built a bank, if a bank built an application that maybe didn't take race into account in the initial model, but had a proxy for race and actually made lending agreements based upon the color of your skin. Like, that's not good. So let's make sure we build models that aren't freaking racist, right? Like, I think we can all agree on that, right? So to sum up, there's lots of other opinions. And I think we should look at all those opinions, not just the ones that get press, but then let's not lose focus of the core issues around bias and regulation, and how we have smart regulation in a way that protects society and protects that, but also gives us ability to innovate.
Yes. And that sounds a lot easier than I think it will be in practice, right? One point before
right.
one point before we move on to, like, the practical aspects of adoption of AI, I think one of the things that freaks me out the most about this whole Gen AI discussion is the fact that we don't really know how it's doing what it's doing.
Yeah.
Right. It's not clear. And that to me is worrisome. Like, it seems almost like, well, that genie has left the bottle. And
let me take the other side of that argument, though. So do you understand how your brain works? Or do we, it's a rhetorical question. We don't understand how our brain fully works. We have some idea, but we don't completely understand it.
Yeah.
But we know how to teach a kid. We know how to get better. We know the type of things we need to do to actually improve. So we definitely hold the AI to a higher standard, don't we? And maybe we should. But we don't actually fully understand intelligence in our biological forms.
Yeah. Well, the challenge there is that when our brain malfunctions, we're screwed, right? And then you have all kinds of disease states and challenges to normal everyday functioning when parts of your brain start malfunctioning. So yeah, it's an interesting one. And the other part of this that I find rich, honestly, is that the people who spent the last 20 years building this are the ones now raising red flags and saying, "Ooh, this genie is."
Only some of them, again, and without naming.
Only some of them. Well, those are the ones that get the visibility nowadays, right? Because they're the ones that are being, I guess, clicked on the most. So they end up showing up in your feed the most, right? So
I would just say, like, I have a huge respect for Andrew Ng and Yann LeCun and some of the illumination. No one can say that they're not in, the top 5 or top 10 AI researchers of all time, right? And so following all of them, I think, gives a more complete story.
Well, I would love to get them on the show as well. So if you can connect me,
Well,
I might
I'm not like buddies with the, I'm
just
just saying,
asking the
they're like
question.
the top AI guys in the world, right?
I have to ask. I have to ask. Okay. So anyway, now you touched briefly on the concept of companies that are incorporating AI into the way they do business, right? And then how do they incorporate responsible AI? So how does a company actually get started and not become obsolete in this race? Because I know a lot of very senior people, C-suite executives that are, 50s, 60s, they are stressed beyond belief because they don't really know what's happening. So they're kind of, a deer in the headlights. They know it's important, but they don't know how to go about it. So what advice do you have for them?
Number one, it's about education and data and AI literacy within the organization. So what you see most often is looking at this and the way you do that is you have an AI strategy on a programmatic basis as opposed to a project basis. So what is very common is that people run this like they would run an ERP project. Okay, well, let's pick exactly what this is and go do that use case, and then let me know exactly what it's going to cost and exactly the time frame of this, and let me know when it's done. But if you ban the word AI and you just think of using data to optimize a business process, what you should be saying is, okay, here's our strategy as an organization. Where do we think that there's ways to make predictions, use data and make predictions to be able to optimize or reinvent that process? And that means you're going to need to have IT at the table. It means you're going to have the business unit at the table. It means you have leadership and support. All of those groups need to come together. You can't just go to your tech group and your IT group and say, hey, do some AI for us. That doesn't make any sense. But that's what the vast majority of organizations have done. So as you bring these groups together, you end up having much higher levels of adoption because you get rid of the fear. But it's putting a value on that AI literacy across the organization. Your first project is probably going to fail. But if it's part of a program, you'll have learnings from that are going to help improve your business process in collecting data and allow so that you understand and you've built that institutional knowledge for how to succeed through projects 2 through 10. The leader in this field, there's a guy named Dan Fagella at Emerge, EMERG, is it G or J? Anyway, if you email Dan at Emerge, he's done a ton of research on this in the space. And this question that you've asked, our entire side of a business is based upon it. So I can't do it justice in just a 3 to 4 minute answer. But it's really about education and people. And it's not about necessarily the technical side of it. And for the first couple of years of starting this business, I thought it was all just the better engineers you get, the more you're going to be. But if you can't tell a story, if you can't eliminate fear, if you can't help build this data literacy, you never actually succeed in business. And so whether you like it or not, like in real life, it's a little bit more boring. It's a little bit more of a people problem.
Culture eats strategy for breakfast. So how do you recommend people? I like the idea of openness, education, awareness in terms of corporate culture, but people are not rational when it comes to their fear of losing their jobs, being put out of work. I mean, look at the labor unions in the US right now, the massive strikes going on everything from, the movie sets, the writers' strike, all the way to the UAW, Detroit. This is a result of fear, right? We're going to lose our jobs. These jobs are going to be done by robots, or they'll be done in China, or the AI will write the script for the next movie. How do we overcome that? What is the messaging here? How do we overcome this mass? You see, when you're talking to a person one-on-one, they can be rational, you can be rational. But when you're talking to 100,000 people that are afraid of losing their jobs, that's a crowd, that's a mob, and they're not thinking rationally. So how do you explain this? Because being afraid of the ocean doesn't make the ocean disappear, right?
Right. Exactly. Mark Andreessen has talked about this, and you sort of alluded to it a bit beforehand of like, are we going to have this post-work society? And Mark, for those who don't, Mark Andreessen would be, a famous tech entrepreneur, actually was founder of Netscape. We mentioned Netscape beforehand, and one of the most successful venture capitalists on the planet.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to borrow a point that he made in a recent article where he said, throughout history, we've had new technology. And if you understand economics and supply and demand, when you lower the cost of a good, you increase the demand. And that's going to continue to happen with AI, and it's no different than any other technology. We've continued to lower the cost. Like, did we eliminate all, after the invention of cell phones, did we eliminate, like how much did that change work? Did that eliminate this huge section of the economy? I mean, you could argue there's some, yes. Are there some jobs like telephone switchboard operators going back 100 years? Do we want those jobs around?
Yeah.
So there will be some jobs that will be eliminated, but the vast majority of the time, I think we're going to take tasks within jobs. Those professions and those jobs will not be eliminated, but tasks will be changed in terms of how we actually carry those things out. And so it still comes back to education. And you raise a good point about the mob versus individual. I mean, I think I've had lots of conversations. I was at an executive retreat last week talking with 20 executives from one particular company. And if you explain the idea and you explain internally that, hey, you know what, we want to get more efficient, and the way we survive as a business is that we increase productivity through the usage of these tools. The way you don't have a job is that you stagnate and you do things the exact same way, and then someone else is going to eat your lunch. So you cannot like it.
Dead.
But
you're dead
that's just
away.
the market, right? Like, I mean, I guess you can go get a job for the government. Like, if you believe in capitalism, if you believe in free markets, there will always be improvement, and this will happen. Now, I want to be able to pay my software engineers more. If we can use co-pilots and I can get a 30% increase in productivity, I would love to split that with them. I'd love to pay them 15 or 20% more and have the rest for myself and have less engineers as we go up and put more into them.
Sure.
So, listen, and the questions you're asking are big philosophical ones and ones that are frankly a little bit above my pay grade. I do believe, if you coming back to it, that we're going to create a portfolio or a company that has, dozens, hundreds of companies working on very specific AI applications that are mission critical to the industries and the organizations we serve. I think a lot will be around clean tech and reduction of carbon. And then the second big bucket will be on health and building tools that allow us to have better patient outcomes at an affordable rate. I think you look at climate and health as the two biggest problems that humanity is going to face in the coming decades. You're not going to solve those problems. You're not going to make a dent in them without AI. And so are there problems? Yeah. And you've properly articulated it. I'm going to keep on plugging away here because I think we're going to actually make things better for more people by leaning in.
Amazing. So I think I'm witnessing some typical Canadian humility here when you say that this is above my pay grade, because I doubt that there are very many people that are, much more qualified to talk about this than you. So I appreciate the typical downplaying of self that we Canadians sometimes do. I think Canadians suck at marketing, just generally.
So bad.
We suck. I mean, the contributions of the country towards the internet, people don't realize.
AI, like again, deep learning and RL like have huge roots in Canada, but again, it's any of those problems we mentioned beforehand, we're all working for Google or Facebook, nobody in Canada. So hopefully we can change that. I mean, there's a group called the Council of Canadian Innovators, led by Jim Balsillie and John Ruffalo, that's trying to keep more scale-ups in Canada. Again, not to bore your audience with Canadian specific stuff, but as we see more venture dollars here, as we change attitudes for risk appetites and And yeah, it's a funny place in the world being so safe and close to the US, but also that sometimes makes us fat and lazy. And so sometimes we just need to get a bit of a kick in the ass to actually think bigger. But yeah, that's where, hey, I had a good exit when I was younger. Tying this back to the start of the conversation, we want to be around and build a company for the long run. I look at there's a company called Constellation Software, which is an amazing Canadian company, one of the top performing stocks over the last 20 years. Bought up a ton of vertical SaaS businesses over the last. I think there's that same parallel. We can create a platform. Right now, we're using that venture studio model where I think we can build a massive business through a very unique structure here that accommodates what's unique about AI, which is the data is different everywhere, right? And so you can't just take a SaaS business model and apply it onto an AI company and expect it to work. There's things that do, but there's differences. And so hopefully we can change it by example. If we're successful, when we're successful in building a company that throws off hundreds of millions of dollars worth of cash flow and that's worth multiple billions of dollars, then you know, I think it'll be a little bit easier for that next generation to be like, no, you can build it here. There's no reason why you can't build it in Canada. The pandemic has changed it all. You can build it in Pakistan, you can build it in Canada, you can build it anywhere. And so that's what's actually exciting now about the tech that exists and the stuff in the cloud that's there. Even if you're not in the AI space, like, man, I can remember having to go down and replace hard drives at 3 a.m. for our servers, right? For when we were launching Investopedia. Like, and by the way, hard drives never crash during the day. They crash at 3 a.m. in the morning. That's just a rule. They design them that way, right? So I look, there's never been a better time to be an entrepreneur. There's never been a better time to build a company, whether it's from tech, the problems we have to solve, the capital that's out there. And I think that's just a reason to be optimistic that, you know, let's not put our head in the sand in terms of the problems, whether it's AGI or regulations or whatever that is, but there's far more positive to the story than negative.
I'm with you. And before I let you go, you've really been very generous with your time today. Ethical considerations when implementing AI. Any thoughts?
Yeah, we were talking about the responsible AI, you know, quite a bit there. I think it's you can't just run through and build an AI application and then after the fact be like, did we take into account bias? It's kind of like you got the cake is made and people are putting on this like responsible AI icing. That doesn't work. You need to go back to the recipe. So I'll give you one example here. We were working on one use case. It was with a government. It was actually tied with some benefits that came out. And in the data structure for gender was male, female. And we had a non-binary team member who was looking at this, and this person said, I'm actually not represented in this data set. And so I like that example because it shows, wait a minute, if you're only looking at this with hindsight, it needs to be evolved. That ethical lens needs to come into account, and it's biased, but it's also privacy and a whole bunch of other things in terms of how that's put together, right? And you know, it's so that we understand here's the users and here's going to be the effect of this applications, right? And so from day one, if you understand and you're educated on these concepts and the teams understand this and executives and board members are all aware of this, then we can build tools that actually augment human potential as opposed to the dystopian potential that they could result into if we build tools that are malicious.
Indeed. Cory Janssen, it's been a revelation talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, that's a big word. Thank you. You're too kind. But yeah, it's been a fun conversation, and yeah, it's you know, for any entrepreneurs who are out there that are looking for someone to build with, I'm not hard to find on LinkedIn. Just send me a note, and we'd love to have a conversation.
Fantastic. The next time I'm back home, I'm going to come see you.
Anytime. Looking forward to it.
You take care. Have yourself a brilliant day. Bye for now.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.